First off, flatten your desired area. You only really need to dig out the blocks 2 blocks above normal ground level if you're going to build the colorful terrain at the end. Flatten it out completely if you don't plan on including it. Now you can start the perimeter of the base. Only the top row of concrete is necessary if you're building the base flat on the ground. All the concrete below will likely get covered up by the colorful terrain if you're building that. The actual dimensions of this base is 33 blocks wide at the bottom, 22 blocks wide for the 2 long sections, and 11 blocks across for all the shortest lines if you exclude the inner corners. Follow these steps for the redstone door very closely. You don't have to place the redstone components on white concrete since you'll never have to look at the redstone ever again. The redstone door design is simple but sleek. Make sure to place buttons at the end. Since the redstone door design is now complete, you can take the time to fill in the entire floor of the base. Pay attention to the redstone line placed under the floor 3 blocks away from the edge. Also, these redstone blocks will come into play later. I did make some mistakes when building this mini contraption, but it's not that complicated. Both repeaters are on 4 ticks, which takes 3 clicks to get them there. Keep placing in the floor until you line up with the hole on the other side of the redstone blocks. This can be a difficult part of the build, so pay close attention. This is an item stream, so you don't necessarily have to place white concrete to encapsulate it. Now mine straight up when you line up with the hole in the floor. It's very important to fill up the walls if you mine them out and place soul sand, ice, and a pressure plate on the ice. Now you can place in the water leading up to the surface and fill in what you mined out, minus a mini tunnel for the water stream. Before you place the water for the item stream, you have to place a few redstone components. Make sure the observers are facing each other for this dispensing mechanism to work. Now you can finally place the water source in front of the dispenser or dropper. Place blocks above the item stream to make sure it's fully encapsulated. Now you can place this simple redstone above ground and you can keep placing in the floor. There is one random barrel placed 4 blocks away from the edge because it keeps respawn supplies. Then the enchantment setup is 3 blocks away from the barrel. One of the corners can just be wood if you're stingy because you only need 15 bookshelves for max enchantments. After you finish the enchanting setup, you can fill in almost the entire rest of the floor. Fill in everything except a 7x10 hole 7 blocks away from the right edge and 6 blocks away from the bottom. Dig out the walls and dig in the floor 4 blocks down and then fill in the walls and floor. Follow these placements of villager workstations and sea lanterns and then start the walls of the mini maze. If you don't have sea lanterns, you can use glowstone if you want. Finish the walls and then place an iron door, buttons, and a ladder to escape. This contains the villagers in the maze. Don't make the same mistake I did by putting in the villagers before you cover up the workstations that they can use to climb up to escape. After you get all the villagers in there with hopefully no casualties, cover it all up. Next, you'll want to start the carpet that goes around the interior of the base, and it should be purple since it's a recurring theme of the base. I suppose if you want to go for a different color scheme, you can. The carpet extends from the enchanting setup to surround the villager maze, and then goes all the way till it's 5 blocks from the left edge of the base. The storage setup is really quite simple. It's just double chests in rows that are stacked 6 blocks up. When you complete that, you can use something like smooth quartz and smooth quartz slabs on top to arch over the chests. The torches are important for preventing mob spawns. Now comes the trickiest part of the build, in my opinion. Let's focus on building this wall by wall. First, start off by building 2 concrete pillars 10 blocks high on each side of the front of the base. Keep all the pillars 2 blocks from the edge of the base to leave room for the actual exterior, which comes later. Then you can make more pillars all the same height, all spaced out by 1 block. After that's done, follow the simple torch and block pattern. It may seem complicated, but it's just a repeating pattern except for the center. Then continue the center up 11 blocks high. Just remember that all the full gaps are 3 blocks high, except those that run into the top and bottom, or those 2 4-block tall ones next to the buttons. The pattern on this left side is almost the exact same thing as the front. Just follow along with these general placements. If you need, put the video on half speed or keep pausing when you're trying to count out the specific placements. If you're watching this on your phone, I sincerely apologize since it's probably difficult to see everything. When you round the corner again, see that it's the exact same pattern that you can probably replicate just by looking at it. Remember, it's 21 blocks tall here. The only difference is that the edge isn't a full pillar, but is instead like a continuation of the wall. For this next section, I did make a mistake and I built up 11 blocks high instead of the 10 that it's meant to be. I was getting ahead of myself. Once again, I replicated a similar design for the wall, but at the bottom right, I didn't include 2 of the concrete blocks intentionally to create room for the redstone. I apologize for this wall seeming more complicated. The left is a 21 block high segment, while the right is the usual 10 blocks. While the design is once again similar and repeatable, I do intentionally leave a block out of the bottom right and a row of blocks on the bottom left. Yes, not including torches in the top part of the left segment is intentional, but I did forget to place a block on the top left where there's a 5 high gap. I fixed that later, but you can fix it now while you're at it. This next segment is literally the same 21 block high pattern that you're used to. Hold off on placing any more torches for now in this section, even though you'll eventually need to place 2 in the bottom. Once again, the row of missing blocks and that one other missing block is all intentional. It creates room for the components of the automatically refueling super smelter. To preface the next section, you need to create an arch that goes up another 11 blocks blocks high. The pattern is super simple once again, and you can just pause the video to place all the blocks in. This section has torches unlike the last two. However, you've got to stop when you get to the point that lines up with the top of the shortest sections, which is 10 blocks above the foundation. Stay at that level to build out the next section, which only has torches in the top 2/3 of the wall, because the bottom will be occupied by other things. I'm going to make the rest of these wall segments much faster, so pause the video as much as you need. This wall is much different from the rest because it has a gap with smooth quartz stairs and a sea lantern in the middle. The gap is 2 blocks away from the bottom and 3 blocks away from the top. And the next wall is super predictable in design. This last segment that stays connected to the ground is 10 blocks tall again, but is clearly different because it includes a nether portal. While this doesn't follow the same pattern you're used to, it's really easy to replicate, so let's move on quickly again. Here's where things get a bit different. We've got the same pattern here, but it's not connected to the floor. I'm sure you know exactly why, because you've definitely seen the short video about the base. I don't even think I need to provide dimensions of the wall, because you can pretty easily see the width and height of the wall based on how it connects to the other walls. This next section goes up yet another 11 blocks up. Don't worry, it doesn't get any higher than this because that's the peak. The bottom of the section should line up with the top of the walls to the left of it. Speaking of the walls to the left of that section, build them. It's the same pattern, so at this point I'm just saying stuff to stall so you can have time to conveniently pause the video to count out the block placements for yourself. Now just move on to complete the other side, which isn't as simple because I built multiple sections all at once. Just repeat the same pattern. I'm sure you're tired of me saying that, and the only information you need me to specify is that the part on the left you don't fill should line up with the wall closer to where I'm filming from. We are on the home stretch, but don't make the mistake of placing torches in this little section here. Otherwise, you'd have to remove them, which is a hassle. Now fill in these last inner wall sections with the same predictable pattern. To give you time, I just want to thank you for becoming a patron. I assume you are one of my patrons if you're able to watch this video. If not, it's not the end of the world, but if you are, thank you for supporting me in my career. It does mean a lot. Also, if you don't already know, on my Patreon page, I do include the Java world download, the list of materials you need for each base, and different kinds of schematics, so utilize what you need. If you have any ideas on how I can improve the resources for recreating my base designs, leave me a message. I want the process of creating these bases to be as frictionless as possible. For the sleeping and crafting area, place cauldrons full of lava for burning beetroot if you want your base to be truly great. Then you can place armor stands with iron armor. I went with iron armor instead of the varying types of armor because it fits the color scheme better. Then you can make a map wall by placing item frames and then placing your explored maps in the item frames. The things you probably want to include here is a crafting table, anvil, smithing table, loom, brewing stand, grindstone, and cartography table. Now let's move on to the dreaded automatically refueling super smelter. It's a wonderfully useful contraption, but isn't very straightforward to construct. Follow along with the rails I'm placing, but extend the rails 1 block closer to where I'm filming from if you want to cover more area. I do change this myself later in the recording, but it's easiest to do now. Also, don't forget the lever that powers the redstone rail in the corner. After you place the 2 concrete blocks in the repeater, you can place the hopper minecart. At this point, I started placing in the glass and then the chests. The chest on the right is the input, and the left is the output. Place these rows of hoppers all facing into the previous hopper. It allows the items to funnel into the output chest. Now extend the redstone line from under the hoppers and place a comparator in this direction. The purple blocks are purple concrete powder. Now you can place in all the furnaces with hoppers facing into them from above and from the sides. Facing hoppers correctly is extremely important for the contraption to work properly, so be careful. Now you can place in the lava after you place in 2 more purple concrete powder blocks. Also fill in these 2 gaps in the wall with glass. Run the minecart tracks up and around the hoppers for the item distribution system. It all has to be placed exactly like this for the contraption to work properly. Pay close attention to everything in this section. For the water stream, place blue ice with pressure plates in these 2 locations. Place grass blocks in these spots and line the edge with open trapdoors to keep the water in. Now you can place the 3 water source blocks in to let the future bamboo circulate around the fuel hoppers. Place more glass in a sea lantern, and then place more open trapdoors to keep the design consistent and to serve a function. Move on to the redstone line yet again and extend it up a few blocks and across. Place the repeater in this very specific spot for the contraption to be most efficient. It has to do with the output of the comparator. I changed the positioning of the redstone here partway through the recording because I noticed a flaw. This is how it's supposed to look near the hoppers. Place the obsidian, redstone, and the trapdoor, and then move on to making the glass wall taller. Its purpose is to stop flying bamboo from sometimes randomly getting flung into the hoppers. Follow along with how I encapsulate the item stream. I use all these trapdoors to make it look more sleek. Having a bunch of blocks to encapsulate water looks a bit clunky. Notice that there are glass blocks on the side of the item stream with the wall, and that there's a cobblestone wall at the end. The cobblestone wall is extremely important because it makes the bamboo drop in a very specific location so it doesn't end up in any of the top hoppers and break the machine. When placing in the water, don't accidentally waterlog any of the trapdoors. I tend to make that mistake a lot. When you place the top water source block, you're done placing the water because it needs to flow to move the items. Now you can move on to creating the flying machine. Place the repeater with 4 ticks, and then you can place in the leaves. leaves. The leaves are very important and need to be placed in this way because they don't stick to slime or honey blocks. That's super important for keeping the flying machine intact. Place a furnace with redstone on top and an observer facing away for the return station. Now just follow the precise placements of the observers, sticky pistons, and slime blocks. Then you can place the rest of the leaves and the last observer. Fill in the floor with dirt blocks and start filling in the walls with glass and sea lanterns. This one wall can be completely glass, but the rest of the walls need to include sea lanterns or another solid light source for the bamboo to grow all the way up. Every bit of the wall needs to be solid so that the bamboo doesn't land on the ledges, but instead falls all the way down to the ground and gets collected by hopper minecarts. The pattern I went for is placing glass on the top 2 of the 3 high gaps and then a sea lantern on the bottom parts of those gaps. I did completely forget to place some blocks here, so ignore that mistake. I also placed more sea lanterns and glass below everything so the bamboo can grow. While I was there, I improved the rails like I mentioned earlier. Now you can finally place in the bamboo. I manually filled up the fuel hoppers full of bamboo so the machine would turn itself off and not be running for the rest of the tutorial. You can just let the machine run and fill up the hoppers for you while you complete the rest of the base if you want. Now let's move on to the next section, which is an optional step. I'm gonna pretty much glaze right over this because it's not straightforward and can't really be explained. You just place a bunch of 2x2 cubes of concrete blocks with these colors. I went a little crazy, but I made sure to make it a gradient so there's gradually fewer concrete blocks the farther you get from the base. They're all intentionally varied heights, and they cover up the bottom parts of the base. It definitely spices up the base, but it requires a ton of resources and it's hard to pull off. The last part of the base is the shell. When placing the concrete powder all around, make sure to include this singular concrete block so that the redstone door actually works. Otherwise, it'll break and you won't be able to get into the base. Now you can place the concrete powder the way I do it or not. I just went in circles around the base and surrounded the frame. Just make sure the wall of purple concrete powder is 9 blocks tall all the way around. Once that's complete, fill in part of the ceiling of the base with more white concrete. It's super straightforward and you just need to extend 1 block outward from the purple concrete. It's important to do this 1 layer at a time because each layer of white concrete serves as the support for the purple concrete powder. When you finish placing that all in, notice that you have to do a 2 wide ring of white concrete around the frame before you place more purple concrete powder. You'll see why in a minute. This is all super easy to do, so I'm just going to speed up the progression for the rest of this process. I'm surprised you've stuck around to the end of this tutorial. Leave a comment to let me know that you've actually taken the time to build the base, or just to watch the tutorial because it would please me to know that all this effort isn't going to waste. When everything is fully encased, repeat this pattern all the way around with white concrete. If me just panning around the base isn't enough for you to understand the design, just join my Discord and ask me for screenshots for you to reference. But I doubt this is that hard to follow. Now the base is complete, but there's one thing I forgot to include when creating this tutorial. Make sure you have these other buttons inside so you can actually exit the base.